wow, I was so frustrated and angry about not only what happened to them, but that I had never heard of heir property before. I had never heard of any of this before. And this is something that's been going on over hundreds of years. And so I knew that I wanted to write a book about heir property and kind of raise the awareness to this topic so people are not blindsided.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Terah Shelton Harris, and we are going to be talking about her second novel, Long After We Are Gone. I had the pleasure of hearing Terah talk not just once, but twice about this book pre-publication. And I was so excited to read it, just hearing her talk about it. And it's really nice that book is not only just good when they talk about it, but it completely delivers. And that's what we have here.
Mm.
Since our review is not yet live, it's going up tonight, I wanted to share one comment from an author that I think really captures this book. Erica Baumeister, the New York Times bestselling author of No Two Persons, says it's a big, beautiful, devastating, and ultimately hopeful novel. That's exactly what I saw reading it. So
Yeah.
you're so welcome. So nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. And that quote, Erica, she is just an amazing, first of all, she's an amazing author in her own right.
Right.
And for her to agree to blurb the book, and then I was so nervous and she loved it. And she sent me this long email afterwards to tell me how much she loved it. I was very honored.
Yeah. It's wonderful when you put something out in the world and somebody sees it the way you see it back, because you don't know how your work is going to be interpreted. You don't know what anybody's going to say. Will they see it the way I saw it instead of just reading it?
That's right. Absolutely. And also this book is somewhat of a departure from my first book, from One Summer in Savannah. It has some 4 siblings, and they could be considered somewhat unreliable. And so they're not, sometimes make the best decisions, and there are probably times where people would want to throw this book at the wall. I'm like, why did they do this? And so it's such a different type of book story from One Summer in Savannah. So I was equally nervous about that. But, for Erica to come back and say, you know what, you did it. It was beautiful. It was hopeful. And she just got exactly what I was trying to do.
Yeah. We're going to talk about those siblings because you're right. It's really 4 very different siblings, 4 very stories about how they all track and how they all change as the book goes along as well.
Yes.
And what they learn and discover. There's a lot of packed in this book. There's a lot packed inside. Yes. So before we talk about the book, I'd love you to explain what you do at the very beginning of the book, where you tell us what heir property is. And I think that that's important for people to know before, and it's really, don't skip that part at the beginning, folks, because it's going to give you an entree to something you probably don't know much about.
That's right. First of all, I believe in author's notes. As a longtime librarian, I love author's notes. I love not necessarily to use them as spoilers. I know some people skip over them because they consider them to be spoilers sometimes, but I want to kind of I love when authors set up the story. And so both of my books have these author's notes. Sometimes they're author's notes about the actual topic, but also trigger warnings and content warnings as well, so people can be prepared to what they're going to step into. But for this book, I wanted readers to have a little bit more context before they started reading about what heir property was, and kind of have a definition of it, and to understand that this is a problem that's still currently going on today. I wanted people to know that this is not a historical novel. This is contemporary. This is happening today. And so they can kind of understand the Solomon siblings and why they were struggling to save their land and how important it was, but because it's still happening today. And so heir property is a form of ownership in which descendants inherit interest in the land. It's very similar to like holding stock in like a company. And there's so many problems with having heir property today, is that over time, over multiple generations, there can be quite a few heirs to a particular piece of land. And so heir property so I was like, how do you get heir property? Where did that come from? And so it led me to put my librarian hat on and start doing more and more research. So the purpose of the author's note is just so people can have an understanding of what it is before they walk into it, because I start the novel with the characters, with the 4 siblings. And so I wanted you to kind of get a sense of who they were as people,
Mhm.
and then kind of walk you into the heir property. So it's not just a jarring shock to everyone.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it is going down through generations, starting after Reconstruction. Is that when the time
Yes,
was?
yes. So my research led me to the Reconstruction, because I was thinking, why would someone not have a will? You know, what is heir property and how did it get started? And so my research led me to after the Reconstruction, when a lot of formerly enslaved Americans began buying up a lot of land. And a lot of the land that they could afford was either land that they had previously worked and been enslaved on, or undesirable land like swamp land, or land that was really hard to farm or needed a lot of work. That was the land that they could afford. So that's what they bought. But unfortunately, at the same time, a lot of people didn't like that. And so there was these laws and loopholes created to dispossess them of their land. And so at a time when a lot of these formerly enslaved Americans did not trust Southern courts, they did not go into a courthouse to get a deed, get a title for their land. They did not have a will, a piece of paper, because in addition to that, a lot of them could not read or write. So they didn't trust what was put in front of them was what they said it was going to be. And so they passed their land and their homes down via heir property. And that was the best solution at the time. That was the best thing they thought they were doing. But over time, unbeknownst to them, there were these laws that was created. And over time, and where we have now, a lot of these same laws are still sitting on the books. And the problem with heir property is, over multiple generations, if you have a lot of heirs to a particular piece of land, in some states, it only takes one heir, just one, to start to sell the land, and then it's lost forever.
Wow. Wow. Years ago, a friend told me about her family having heir property and what was happening. Somebody had passed away and they had all stayed together to ensure it was in the family, and somebody wasn't paying attention and doing what they're supposed to. And later in this book, we learned from an attorney that this land is estimated to be more than 1/3 of Southern Black owned land and
Yes.
roughly 3.5 million acres. I want people, before we get into the book, to get an idea of how large the topic is. And they're worth over $28 billion. Did you know any of this going in before you put it on your librarian hat?
I knew nothing of this. And so the inspiration, if I can talk about the inspiration, where I first learned about it, was in an article, in a New Yorker article, about these two brothers, Melvin Davis and LaCurtis Reels of North Carolina, who went to jail for 8 years after refusing to leave the land that their great-grandfather had purchased 100 years prior, after it was sold out from underneath them without their knowledge or consent. And I'm reading this article in the New Yorker, and I thought, wow, I was so frustrated and angry about not only what happened to them, but that I had never heard of heir property before. I had never heard of any of this before. And this is something that's been going on over hundreds of years. And so I knew that I wanted to write a book about heir property and kind of raise the awareness to this topic, so people are not blindsided, like I was, and like they were. They had no idea that they knew that it was family land, but they did not understand it was heir property. And, the funny story to this is, there's a personal connection for me in this story. I was talking to my husband and I was so excited. I feel so sorry for him whenever I have a book idea, because I'm like, I run everything by him. And I was telling him about heir property, and I was like, hey, do you know about heir property, this and that? And he let me tell him the whole story. And he says, you need to go talk to my mom. And I'm like, why? He said, because our family land is heir property. And I was like, well, oh my goodness. And I went to go talk to his mother, and she tells me that the land, now I always knew that they had family land because they're very extremely proud of it. But I never knew it was their property. That term had never been used in the 15 years that we were married, that we are still currently married, never been used before. And she tells me that she found out that in the 70s, now the land where they live it was in rural Alabama, in my town where I live in Dothan. The problem that's happening over time is, where they were out in the country, because again, that was the land that they could afford, but the city has now moved out to them. And that's what's happening in a lot of these areas. Back then, a lot of desirable land was swamp land and land by water. But they didn't want to live close to the water back then. We didn't have air conditioning, we didn't have bug spray. There were issues with that. There was a lot of flooding. So people lived more inland. But as you can imagine now, everybody wants to live by the water,
Right.
and so what was undesirable then is not undesirable now. And that was the exact same case with my husband's family, is that now where they were out in the country, the city has kind of come to them now. And she said she got a knock at the door. And a man said, I'm interested in purchasing your land. And she knew that the one thing, just like the Solomon siblings in this book, was it stayed in the family.
Mhm.
And she says, no. And the man says to her, well, you're going to sell me this land. And then this is in the 70s. This was right. I mean, this is Alabama. So can you imagine the civil rights? Can you imagine all of that? And my mother-in-law, you have to know her. She basically said no with a lot of other words. But she was like, no. But that sparked that in her, like, oh, we're living on this land and I've never seen a deed. I've never seen a title. Whose name is it in? It scared her. It frightened her to realize for the first time. She had been living on that land her whole life. Her parents lived on that land, but no one ever talked about the deeds, the title, whose name is it in. And so it sparked this 3 year, she said, 3 year process of turning her land from heir property into actually having it deeded off. And in the 70s, it requires so much work in order to do this, because you have to track down all the potential heirs. And now it's easy for us to pull up ancestry.com and pull up and see. But back then, could you imagine having to go to courthouses and pull out census records? It was a lot more difficult back then. And then you also have to have the land surveyed, which is very expensive. I forget how many acres of land they have, but I want to say it's easily over 100. And so you have to have that land surveyed. So that was very expensive in the 70s. And my mother-in-law grew up poor. But it was worth it to them to make sure that their land was safe. And so their outcome is a positive outcome of what could happen with heir property. But in the book, we talk about the negative parts of heir property. And so I was really, and I knew I needed to write a book about it then once my husband told me about it, because I could offer like a positive side to what happens with heir property.
Yeah. It's what's interesting is the proximity of this land to the water. And it's just what you were saying. Nobody ever wanted to be by the water. But now, like a hotel says, oh, we can come in and we can do this, that, the other thing. So it was undesirable land before has now become very desirable. And that's what you're showing in the book. It's like,
that's right. That's right.
And they have the right to say, oh, I want to go do this.
That's right.
We've got that kind of an intel behind this. But did you always plan to tell the story through the eyes of 4 different siblings? Was that the start, or did you say, go in a different way?
I wasn't sure how to start it. After I did all this research and I was ready to actually start writing, I was like, okay, how do I tell this story? And it was something that my mother-in-law said about the taking over and being the caretaker of the land. She said, we are responsible for this land. And it has been something that's been passed down to us. And I thought, oh, that's intergenerational trauma. Right? That's intergenerational trauma, is when something is passed down from generation to generation. And so I said, oh, this has to be a family drama. This has to be an intergenerational family drama. And so Southern families, and during that time back in the day, were these large families, and so I thought, okay, I want to tell a family drama, large family. And I thought, I need some inspiration for this. What could be a good inspiration book that I've read that I loved? And it was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And he used 15 different points of view to tell that story. And I just knew no way my publisher was going to allow me to have 15 points of view. But I loved how 15 different people were able to tell the story of their plight. So I thought I could do that. Maybe I could do 4 POVs, 4 siblings. I knew I wanted more than 3. 3 people have 3 children now, but 4, something about that 4. Yeah. So I was like, I want to have 4 siblings and they're going to tell the story, and I'm going to tell a story in an intergenerational trauma way, that not only do they have to save their ancestral land, but there is other trauma that has been passed down to them about this land, about the people that came before them, that unbeknownst to them, that they also have to fight and try to save, and just not only save themselves, but also save the land.
Yeah, well, you definitely constructed that. It's like the 4 very different people are in this story. So Junior, here's what I also love. You've got like this cold open where we meet each of them, and we meet each of them not at their best moment. And as I'm going in, I'm like, wow. And then I hear the next one, I'm like, whoa. And then it's like, and then it's like, oh my gosh, like this is like 4 people. And you set up sort of what their weakness is, or their the thing that they're contemplating the most in life. So we open with Junior is grappling with his sexuality, and he's got a male lover named Simon and a somewhat shrew of a wife named Genesis. Okay.
Yes.
All that. And there's a scene with the three of them at the beginning of the book that says so much. Like you are right in that moment. And she's pounding on his door and she has something that she's got to say. And it's sort of like she doesn't see the rest of the room. She's just seeing what she needs to deliver. Did you always have her just like,
That's
okay,
right.
hold open, here she is, you know?
Yes, yes. I wanted to drop the reader right into the story.
Yep.
Right into the story is right before their father dies. I wanted the readers to see what their life was like right before the father dies. And I love books that start. I don't need a lot of necessary build up, just
Mhm.
start, just drop me right into it. And I knew I very quickly had to show the readers what their issues were and their secrets that they were hiding. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to put you right in the middle of it. And I wanted Genesis to just kind of contribute to Junior's confusion about who he is and his identity as a person. I didn't want to make her too shrewd, but I knew that, and I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted certain things to happen.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make her kind of not mean, but just kind of forward, if you know what I mean, because you've read the book, so you know, very forward. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to grab the readers right away and just put them right there so they can understand not only is Junior in love with Simon, but he also has this wife over here.
Yeah. And two children. And which she
And two
quickly
girls.
reminds him. She reminds him.
Yes.
I love when there's a scene, I'm not giving anything away because we know the father died, where she brings the children to the funeral and he goes, I thought you
Yeah.
weren't going to do that. She goes, this is a look and this is the way we're supposed to look.
That's
And
right.
girls
That's
are
right.
dressed perfectly.
That's
And
right.
she's one of those people that outward appearances matter a lot.
A lot.
Them showing up like this, no Simon, no, no. Like if we're writing a scenario, this is the funeral scenario and we're going
That's
to
right.
follow it. And
That's
he's
right.
like, what? Like, what are you doing?
Yes. And I wanted, Junior has all the characters go through this character development. They are not the same people when they start than when the book ends. And I just wanted people to really truly understand what he was up against, that she agreed to something and that she just changed her mind and said, you know what? No, they agreed that the girls would not come to the funeral. He did not want them there. And she just changed her mind and decided that, you know what? They're going to show up because appearances is everything to us. But he's the burden that he had is that he's the oldest. And in the South and in a lot of places, when the father dies, when the mother dies, it's the oldest responsibility to take over for everything. They're the ones that make sure that the will is read, make sure everything was okay. And so he needed that appearance. You know, he's a closeted gay man. He needed that appearance for her to be there. And she knew it and she took advantage of that.
Totally took advantage. Totally took advantage. So then we've got Mance, who's following in his father's footsteps. And I love anything about woodworking. My husband's made a bunch of furniture for our house. He loves to woodwork.
Awesome.
He'll sit there and say, oh, I've got this beautiful piece of oak, or I've got a beautiful, and he'll actually talk about the wood. And I'm like, okay, like we had a tree fall down. I said, can we use that for like, making? And he says, no, it would have to be seasoned. I'm like, all right, that's beyond me now. But he also finds himself fighting himself a lot. He's been in jail a
Yes.
couple of times. He's been in a couple
Yes.
of really bad situations. So why did you want to make him so tough? Like, because did you need a tough character to fight the rest of the family? What was the reason for making him so hard?
Because I wanted him to be like the father. Junior is supposed to be like King, like the father, but he wasn't. He was a little bit more softer. And so the kings in this family, every firstborn Solomon man is named King. And they have this stigma of being this really strong, manly type man. And so I knew I wasn't going to have that in Junior. So it had to be the second son. It had to be Mance. And so but I wanted to show a softer side. I wanted him to, as you said, to be battling himself. So I gave him a lot of anxiety and a temper problem to kind of have, so his internal battle mostly was just within himself, where everybody else's was like a little, well, Toki too, was a little external, but I wanted to be internal for him fighting himself. And so, and then not only did I do that, but I gave him a son who was born deaf. And so he just happened to continue to not let the intrusive thoughts win and just really just learn to not be the person that he felt like he always was. There was a scene where Ella says, you can't be this man anymore. He never really stopped to think about his actions and the things that he did, which is why it landed him in prison more than once. And now with the son, especially a special needs son, he's going to have to think about that with a family. And so I wanted to show this manly man, but also show this softer side of him.
Yeah, who it could be. And then we've got Cece, who has vowed that when she left Diggs, she would never be poor another day in her life. I think that
That's
is the
right.
best line. And
Yeah.
she has all the material trappings. This girl has
That's right.
got everything. But what she does get it has huge consequences for her. I always have
Hmm.
thought though that she should have sold the place up there, and that might have got the place she bought in which she made some money, but I guess it
Yeah.
wasn't going to be enough. And she's going to pay for what she does to get this money in very consequential ways on her.
Hmm.
So she
Hmm.
dips in and out of trouble like this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not realizing that Diggs was actually good for her. She doesn't really
That's
get that.
right. That's
And
right.
she's the one that actually could have protected the land. She
Yes.
had the possibility to do this, but instead she got caught up in being CC in New York, being
That's
CC the
right.
fabulous one. Do I
That's
have her
right.
right? Did I kind of nail what she's,
You nailed it perfectly. You nailed it perfectly. We all know that person or was that person that grew up in a small town or grew up in an area and just wanted to move away. And she just felt like she was too good for Diggs, and that there was a better world out there for her. So she made a promise to herself that she was gonna, and she made this plan and she was gonna do it. She was gonna become a lawyer in New York City, and she did all those things. But as you said, she fell into the material trappings of money and needing money to keep up a certain lifestyle and money to never be able to return home to Diggs. And so she started embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars away from her law firm. And another attorney at the law firm caught her. And so now she's got this secret of what she's doing to help. So he wouldn't tell her secret. And then you later learn that this is her fault. That King, because he could barely read or write, he trusted her and would send her these letters and these things that he would get from these attorneys that had been trying to buy their land over time. And it's her fault. Like they're in the middle of this because a letter went unanswered
Mhm.
and they did not show up in court. And this is her fault. So now she has to return home to the place that she felt like she was too good to be. And this is her fault. She has a burden of that fault. And she knows that the time is ticking for someone to catch her after stealing all this money from her law firm. And oh yeah, the lawyer that's helping them with their case is the love of her life, who she walked away from. So
well drawn character, because she's like walking around in an old Blonix and she's sitting there in the dirt and she's like, oh, what did I do? And they're sitting there like, all
yeah.
these letters came, and she's like, letters. Oh,
But
wait, what did they say on them?
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
very much caught up in herself. And that's what you
very
saw. She
much.
was just very much caught up in herself. And she's going to have to be uncaught up in herself to be like, part of the family again.
Right.
It
That's
doesn't
right.
matter or not. And then
That's
we have
right.
Toki, who clearly has an eating disorder. She eats
Yes.
from loneliness or being alone. The opening thing is where she's going through, I think, a line of McDonald's, and she's just
Mhm.
ordering. You think she's ordering for the group, but she's ordering
That's
for
right.
herself, right?
That's right.
And then she does it with cupcakes later on, and she's like,
Yeah.
like the snowballs, and
That's right.
and you can picture her sadness. She feels like she took care of King. She stayed back when everybody
Right.
else. Max was in jail. Junior was doing his thing. She's the one that took care of him,
That's
and
right.
now she's got something that she finds, these letters that make her question like everything. And
Everything.
their mother has, we also should set up, the mother has not been on the scene, like what
That's
their
right.
mother's name was or whatever. So she's out of the picture, and they're
Mhm.
given kind of this gift of letters, which makes me think, these days, what would you do? Find the emails on your old AOL account and send them? I
That's
said, what
right.
would you do? Because nobody
That's
writes
right.
anything, and they don't write
Nobody
anything
writes
down.
anything. That's
They don't write
right.
anything
That's right.
down. So as much
Yeah.
as we have access to information now, we are missing whole pieces of personal
That's
history
right. That's
because
right.
cards aren't sent, notes
That's
aren't
right.
done. So what
That's
she
right.
has is this gift. And were the letters always part of the story? Did you always know that? Or you say, wait a second, I can do a lot of storytelling by using these letters?
Yes, I love books like that. I love books that have these secret discovered diaries or notebooks or letters. And I wanted their mother to tell the story of her life. All when you open this book is that their mother's not there. They don't know what happened to their mother. And Toki, the rest of them, she's younger than the rest of them. And so they kind of have memories of their mother and they don't miss not knowing her, but she did. And
Mhm.
so this void. She felt this void her whole entire life. She didn't feel like she was anything like her siblings, and she missed her mother. And so she feels that void using these very self-destructive, manners and emotional manners by, overeating. But I knew I wanted the mother to tell the story of what happened to her. But not only what happened to her, but they didn't know their mother, but they really didn't know their father. They found out a lot of stuff through their father through these letters, because King was of a generation where you just didn't talk about things. I'm old enough to remember my grandmother not talking about her past and what happened with her. It's just not something that a lot of the older generations, they like to talk about, which that can be detrimental. It's very detrimental in this story, because when you read these letters, you understand these individual struggles that they think they have is tied to the land. And if King would have just talked to them, if they would have knew their parents' history, a lot of the issues that they had, they would not have had.
They knew what was happening, all the little chapters that went before. My grandfather is the only one who came to this country from Italy. No, none of his brothers or sisters did. And my mother went back and went to the village, and I said, "Did you ask why he left?" And she said, "No." So they all still live in the same place. So she loved that when she went to church, she was kneeling on a kneeler that he might have been, in the same place, and walking the streets and things like that. So I said, "We have to go, but we're going to ask why he left," because no one else has come to live in it. They visited, but no one's come to live. And I think it's those family stories of what really happened then. Why did they strike out and do something different? And then you also start doing, searching, and sometimes you can't find people, and they're like, "Oh, they were a stowaway." Like, they're not going to be on
Wow.
the
Yes.
documents of what's going on. So
my mother-in-law, when I was asking about this land, it was purchased, the land in my husband's family, it was purchased by her great grandmother. And I was asking her, how did this Black woman, now this is my mother-in-law, 76 years old. So you can imagine how old her great grandmother was. I said, how did she buy this? How did this Black woman in Alabama during this time buy this land? She doesn't know. That history is lost forever. She was not married. How did she buy the land? That history is lost forever. So yeah, we have to start to ask these questions while these elders are still with us.
Yeah, you want to know, just like, where's the picture? Where's the story? What's going on? On the other side of the family, my mother-in-law passed away recently, and Greg, my son, who's into history, he runs the historical preservation committee in town, like, he's very into history. He got the trunk that they traveled from Germany with all the stickers over it when they came.
Oh, wow.
And there's this huge, like, box or whatever, and he's like analyzing everything's on it, the names that are on it and things like that. And there are those moments that are just so special, because it's the writing of your family at some point.
That's right.
Lost in so many different ways now.
That's right. That's right.
So okay, so they sit down at the table after King has passed away. His chair is left open. Everyone looks at it. Makes me wonder at one point who's going to be sitting there, like, who's going to go to that chair. And that's it's a moment you've got there that I think you leave for the reader and say, there's an empty chair. Who gets the chair?
That's right. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but that was very symbolic to their history and the history of the firstborn sons and everyone else that came before them. Will there be someone to take over to sit in that chair? And then at the end, you know the answer to that. So
yeah, you definitely get there. Was there one character that was particularly easy to write?
Mance. Because Mance is a combination of my husband and my older brother, probably more than my older brother. My older brother, and in the acknowledgments and stuff in the back, I tell people that this is based on my older brother. He knows that I used it, but he suffers from anxiety and has suffered from a temper problem that has unfortunately landed him in prison. And it was like, I want to talk about that. But then I look at the life that he lives now. You would not know that about him. But that is an internal battle that he continues to fight within himself. He's a very successful businessman now. You would not know that, but he had that in him. And I was like, I want to base Mance on and he's this huge guy, big guy, but I want to base Mance on my brother. So he was easy. So when I was writing the scenes for him, I was just thinking about what my brother would do, what my husband would do. So that was easy. Toki was probably the hardest character for me to write, because I don't know what that's like to overeat, but I could use the emotion. I could take the emotion behind it and just kind of imagine. She's the one that I had to do some research on, what it was like to overeat. But she was the hardest for me. The most frustrating one was Cece, of course, just because she just made some horrible decisions, throughout this book. And so even myself as the writer would be very frustrated with her. Like, why are you doing this? And I know that sounds weird to people that don't write, but it's like, why are you doing this? And so she's probably my most frustrating.
Yeah, she's she's a character, let's put it that way. And yeah, but by the same token, she's redefining herself.
Right.
Everybody over the course of this book redefines themselves and redefines.
Right.
And Junior is coming out and he sits there, and his brother says, okay, big deal. No deal to me.
I
And so
don't
all
care.
the things he's worried about are
Yeah.
really not things you do worry about.
Yeah.
And then Cece's got Ellis, this guy who's loved her his whole life. And
That's right.
he's going to sit there and bail her out. And it's interesting also that you have people that he's a lawyer, he's in a really good position. There's a friend that's in a very good position. So there are people that you have created that are there to help them in a
That's right.
very big way. That also
Right.
shows how much they have come forward, how much people
That's
have
right.
come forward during this
In
time.
life. Yes, absolutely. Junior was probably the most rewarding character for me to write because I love his where he starts and then where he ends is completely different. And so I really, really love that. And he realizes that all the obstacles that he faced, he put there on his own. You know, he was very nervous about coming out to his brother. And Manster says, you know what? I don't care. You're my brother. It doesn't matter. It was just like a 2-second conversation. But, you know, he had been so worried about that his entire time. And he realizes that, you know, I did this to myself. No one else did this. And so he was the most rewarding character for me to write. Ellis has a bigger role in the story than I thought he was going to have. It's just characters tend to take over in your head. And I just thought he'd be there. I didn't know he was going to have. Cece was already facing enough that and then here I am adding a love of her life, her interest to it, but it just added a different dynamic to the story of helping her character, you know, finally realize who she truly was. So her and Junior was the ones that were really fighting, you know, their true authentic self and fighting who they really were. And I felt like Ellis really helped her. He did not put up with her. She had attitude and she thought she was too good, but he would be the first person to put her in her place. And, you know, and everybody has somebody like that in their life who that's my husband. You know, my husband is a very laid back person, but when I'm going a little far off the deep end, he'll say, Tara. And then that's just like my pull to bring me back to center. So that's Ellis. That was Ellis to Cece.
Yeah. I'm usually on 5 things into redoing the house. My husband's on, let's go watch golf. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, well, we're here. And then it's like, I'm on the couch. I'm like, why are you on the couch? I'm like, why are you doing this? But it's, but I think that if we both were going this way, it'd be a big problem. It was really, really a big problem. Yeah. And what I also loved is you see in Genesis's father, James, a lot of who she is with her outspokenness.
That's right.
You watch where she was raised and who she watched. And when he's a pivotal character, we're not going to get into that because that would giving a lot away, but you watch how, and you could see that why he named her Genesis. Like you just see that, you know, this is like, you know, my contribution, my whatever, you know, to the world, etc. And one of those people who's power hungry,
That's right.
hurt so many people for being that way.
Yeah, James was symbolic for, I feel like, how a lot of corporations. So James was like a corporation, you know, as a character of just being greedy, you know, wanting more and more and more and more and more. And I wanted to write that. We already have a villain and I don't feel like I'm giving anything away by saying in the uncle. And so we had a villain, but I was like, that's not there's more than one villain when it comes to family land being taken away. And so I was like, okay, so these corporations that are doing this, you know, they're a villain as well. And so it was a perfect opportunity for James to be that villain. And he just encompasses everything that a lot was happening with these corporations, that it's never enough. You know, they don't care that it's family land. They don't care that, you know, they are coming into areas and overdeveloping areas to where, you know, these families were paying a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of $1,000s in property taxes, are now paying tens of thousands of dollars of property taxes because next door to them is a resort or a golf course, and they've over improved the area. So it raises property taxes up for them. And so that was James in a character. That corporation was in a character. And so, yes. And so you kind of got an idea of how Genesis and why she was the way she was because of her father.
Yeah. And I hadn't thought about that. The taxes will raise in the area nearby. I never, you know, yes, in town here, the taxes always go up, but I've never thought that it could go up significantly if there's a great property nearby. And you're right, with all the construction going out closer to the water now, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is more desirable. And it doesn't matter how much your land is worth if you're not selling at that moment.
That's right.
We'll sit there and look and say, oh, what is our house worth now? But it doesn't really matter because we're not going to sell.
That's right.
So, and a lot of our friends are downsizing now. So I'm seeing, and I'm like, well, that matters because you're selling. We're not selling.
We're not.
You don't know what will happen in 10 years. You might sit there
That's
and
right.
say, but you have to sort of, if you think of it as just economics, it's crazy. But you think about living, and I think that by the end of the story, they're into living as
That's right.
opposed to, I don't know what we're going to do next. I don't know
That's
who
right.
we are or what we are.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So did you know the whole story when you started?
I knew the end. I
Ooh.
have a very chaotic way of writing that I don't recommend to anybody, that to any writers. I know I write the ends of my books first. So I have to know how it ends. And I write to the end. Because the characters could do whatever they want as long as it ends the way that I wrote it. So I knew I wanted this particular end for a reason, which I don't want to spoil for anybody. And so yeah, I know the end. I knew the end. And I knew certain plot points that I wanted to happen, certain things to happen to certain characters. And so I just kind of write to those plot points. And it's kind of like a connect the dots kind of style of writing. And then I get to my end that I've already written.
Right. So you do rough outline. Okay, so you do it like rough, like you're coming to the end, but do you write everything rough and then start prettying it up? Or do you do, let's pretty up this first part, let's then do the second part, let's do the third, or is it just like whoosh, get it out to the end and then we'll figure out the rest?
Oh goodness. I don't write linear. So I can be writing in chapter 17. I can be writing the next day in chapter 12. I can be writing in chapter 1. I write whatever comes to mind at the time during that writing session, which is again a very chaotic way of writing. And it's like a puzzle. So like I have these scenes and it's just a matter of like putting all these particular scenes together. And so that's what I do. It works for me, which does not make sense to a lot of people. They're like, so you don't outline? No, I don't outline. And I don't, I know a lot of writers, they have these detailed outlines. I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous because my mind does not work that way.
Mm-mm.
I write whatever comes to mind and I just put everything together.
I have to say that if I wrote, I'd probably use your style of writing because you write great scenes and then you figure out how to connect them together.
Right.
And you think about it, your writing is very cinematic in a lot of ways because if I watch a lot of television, I mean, I read a lot, but I also watch a lot of books to movies. I watch a lot of streaming these days. And what you see is you've got to be really in there like right
That's
away
right.
and you've
That's
got to
right.
get into the story. And you can write the other parts around, but you've got to know what those big parts are going to be because
That's
just
right.
walking this way is not what it is. It's how am I going to do this? And then figure out the other parts around. And I think that books have changed and writing has changed over, I've been doing this for 26 years.
Mhm.
It's the outside things that you could be doing at the same time have changed.
That's
And the
right.
propulsiveness of the writing has got to be quicker than it was
That's right.
before. When
That's
you look at
right.
the classics, they're not really propulsive. It's great writing, but it's not
Right.
move it through.
That's right. And I'm glad you said that because it goes back to where I just dropped the reader right into the story. You know, that first chapter is rough for Junior. It's rough, even rougher for Cece. You know, she has this major scene in like
Yes.
the pages in. And because you have to compete for your cell phone. You know, you're competing with the cell phone sitting right here. You're competing with the television. You're competing with the outside world. I wanted to immediately drop the readers into the story so they can get to be like, okay, wow, this is something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And right at the beginning, you're like, wow, this is a group of really dysfunctional people. And like, how are they going to come together? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
So at what point in your writing does your editor, agent, who sees it next? Besides probably your husband? Does he get to hear the whole story first?
He hears the whole story. He doesn't read. He doesn't read the pages. So the first person that probably gets it is my really good friend, Jason Powell, who's a writer himself. He's my agent sibling. So we have the same agent.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send him scenes and just say, okay, what do you think about this? Is it good? Do I need to change it? So I'll get his feedback. But primarily I work with a freelance editor.
Okay.
Her name is Kristen. We have worked together. We're working on our third book together now, the book that I'm writing now. And we just have this rapport, just her and I. We just go back and forth. And I'll send her, we normally work in groups of like three chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll send her 3 chapters and then I'll keep working. And then she'll send me those 3 chapters back. And I'll work on those while she's working on the chapters I was working on. I edit as I go along. I know that's like a big no-no to a lot of writers, but that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps me stay in the tone and the characters' heads by keep reworking, you know, these scenes over and over and over again. So me and her work together. We normally do a pass, maybe 2 passes per groups of 3 chapters, and then my agent sees it. And then I make suggestions and changes based on her recommendations, and then I send it to my editor.
Interesting.
So I do a lot of work.
Well, yeah, you do a lot of work along the way before it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel that sometimes if an editor gets it when it's not really together, it's got to be a really gifted editor to make all those changes and make it smooth.
Yes.
I interviewed
Yes.
somebody once and they said, like, we wrote this book over 8 times. And I was like, it should have been read the 9th because it didn't really hinge together. There were great parts, but it didn't flow. And the way
Yes.
you're working on 3 chapters,
Yes.
it hinges the whole thing to work more like, flow. Like it's not, sometimes it's not just rewriting, it's the tone, it's the feel of the whole thing's got to be right, no matter what
Yeah.
you're into.
Working with Kristen is the way we work together. She knows the story as well as I do because she has read it over and over and over again. And what happens is the story is in the writer's mind, and then the agent reads it, and they read it once, and it's not in their head the way it is in my head.
Yes.
And it's not in your editor's head the way it's in my head. But with Kristen, with her working and reading it over and over and over again, it's in her head as well. So she's able to catch things that maybe Abby wouldn't catch, my agent, or my editor wouldn't catch. And so we just kind of work through that. And I also, the reason why I started working with her is because for One Summer in Savannah, my first book, they're telling you, whenever I was pitching it, they're telling you your books have to be as polished as possible. As polished as possible, because let's be honest, editors now just don't have time to do, like you said, it's a great story, but they don't have the time to really rework it. Or, know how to fix a book. Like they know it's a good idea, good story, good characters, but they know something is wrong, but they may not know how to fix that thing. And so for me working with an editor, by the time it gets to her, we hopefully have figured out, if it's something was wrong, how to fix it and made it better.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that too, because the reader only reads it once. The reader doesn't read a book, 6 times.
That's right.
I used to make documentaries before I did this, and I used to say to the people in the room, we're going to watch the past of what's happening. Give me your notes now, because when we take it out to the world, we're not going to have people watching it more than once. So I've got to hear what you hear right away. And if there's a word you don't understand or whatever. And it was a very interesting way to work, because they'd say, can I see it again? I go, yes, after you give me your comments. But I've got to have something first. And you save a lot of time doing that. But there was one shoot that I didn't go on. I was pregnant and I said, I'm not going to go to a city a day the way they were going to do this. And I came back and they said, we think something's missing here. And I said, we think we have to put more in. And I'm like, but you don't. And here I was why. I didn't see it. And I get what you're saying. But you were there and think you need more. But I'm telling you, you don't need that extra 15, 20 seconds. It's all right. And it was very interesting to me when I think about editing a book now. I think about the same thing of, do we need it or don't we? What's going to happen?
That's right. That's right. And so I feel like it makes my editor's job a lot easier that I am turning in very polished manuscript, and the copy editor too. And everybody all the edits that come after that. And so that's my style. I know a lot of people, having a freelance editor is not cheap, but it works. It really works for me. And she's the one, Kristen, that helps me kind of work through, any early issues that I have, or in helping me develop the characters and do different things like that. So I love this way of writing. I cannot imagine writing a book, without her, because we've now written 3 together. And so, yeah, that works for me.
Kristen Hannah talks about working with Megan Chance. They've been working together for 30 years.
Yeah.
And she handwrites X number of pages, hands it to Megan. Megan gives her feedback, says it's good, it's bad, or whatever. And sometimes you're writing to a page count, you're writing to whatever, and you're just it's not there. It's just like not there. And somebody else will call you out on it. And you're just like, saving me time,
That's right.
I think it sounds great. So you were a collection development librarian until what? February? What's it like now walking away from a job I bet you loved to tell us about it?
Well, I mean, I think I dreamed of being a full-time writer, but I didn't think it would happen this quickly. One Summer in Savannah just came out. It hasn't even been a year since that book came out. And I went on tour for that book. It was Target's July book club pick. It's got all the accolades. It was such an unexpected blessing that I was on tour for most of the summer. And I remember going to my director at the time, and I said, I'm going to need to be off most of the summer. And he was fine with it. And I was the deputy director. Collection development is a responsibility that I had, but I was like number 2, and I was out of the library for significant stretches, pretty much from July to the end of the year. And he was fine with that. But I love my job, and I didn't feel like I was giving 100% to it anymore. But then also, I didn't feel like I was giving 100% to like writing and being on tour. And I was writing this book during that time when I was on tour. And I'm like, oh, okay, nothing I was giving 100% to. And I told my husband, I have 3 focuses right now: you, library work, and writing. And I said, something has to go. He was like, well, I hope that I get to stay. So I hope I get to stay. And so, yeah, so it had to be the library work. And then when I turned in Long After We're Gone, I just knew that I needed to just make sure I just focused on touring and promoting this book and then writing, my 3rd book.
Can you write when you're on the road? Can you do that?
I do, because I heard you just say Kristen Hanna writes longhand. I write longhand. I have a notebook and a pencil, and I just write everything out longhand. I can write anywhere. And that's how I wrote when I was working at the library. I go in my car. I know that sounds weird. I go write in my car. I eat in my lunch in the car. And so I would eat my lunch and I would write. When I'm sitting at a stoplight, the character starts speaking to me, I'll grab my notebook and I'll write. I can write anywhere. My husband is a head football coach. And so on Friday nights, I have my notebook there, at halftime, I'm writing. And so that helps me be able to get my word count or get these scenes out without me having to be chained to a desk and a computer.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to sit there and say, okay, I'm just going to get this part written down. I'm going to get something done. Because this business of like, oh, I have to be perfect and the coffee's got to be here. And life's not like that anymore.
Not for anybody that's writing that works full time. You have to people say, Terah, how did you write Long After We're Gone while you were promoting One Summer in Savannah, while you were working at the library, while you were trying to be a great wife? It's because I can write anywhere. You make the time to write. You squeeze in that time. I'm an early riser. I wake up around 4 a.m.
Wow.
I would get some time and writing time in and then so you make the time.
Yeah. I'm the other side. I'll be going to bed at 4. So you walked away from that. Okay, now you've got a dedication in this book, and it says, for Jamel, Bangkok has us now. Now, I'm curious as to what that means.
This is the second time I've been asked about this. Okay, so
but you put it in the book. It's fair game.
I never thought that people would ask me about it. I just thought it was like, okay, I can't believe I'm telling the story again. So we love the Hangover movies with Bradley Cooper, the 3 Hangover movies.
Yes.
And in the 2nd Hangover movie, one of their friends is missing, and they're up on the top of this hotel, and the guy says he's lost. Basically, Bangkok has him now, like he's out there, because Bangkok is this huge city. And so we just love that phrase, Bangkok has him now. And so when we would lose something in the house, so like he's looking for his keys or he's looking for something and we cannot find it, we'll just say Bangkok has it now. Like it's gone, like it's just gone.
I love it.
And so I said that Bangkok has it because we're lost in each other. So
I thought maybe we're going to Bangkok now. It's like we could go to Bangkok now. Different.
Yeah,
I like your story better. It's better than it. I really think it's better. So was this always the title? Was this always the title of the book?
No. Source Books, God bless them. They do a great thing. They market test their titles. And so my original title was Heirland, which HEIR land, which I love that title. And I just knew that it was going to test very well. And it didn't test very well next to Long After We're Gone, which I love that title now because it speaks to the intergenerational trauma that the Solomon siblings go through. And that, they're still dealing with a lot of the issues from the people that have been long gone, long after we're gone, you're still going to have this intergenerational trauma. So it's the perfect title for it. But yeah, it was originally titled Heirland.
Now, if it was Heirland, if I was collection development, I think that would go in nonfiction. So there.
Yes, and maybe that's why, they didn't like that and it wasn't tested very well. But yeah.
But now you've also explained Heirland. I mean, the next person who writes about it could say Heirland, but you explained what it is. And people just don't know, really don't know.
Yeah.
Now the cover's terrific as well. Was this the first cover, or did we play around with covers too?
We play same thing. Source books they do a phenomenal job of trying to get the essence of the story into the cover. And so this was not the original cover. We went through a couple of rounds, as you know, most people do. They go through a couple of rounds to get it right. But I love that cover today. I love the color of it. I love the house, and you know the symbolic of the house since you read the
Yes.
book. I love that the house is on the cover. That was one of the things that I really wanted, was because it's all really about this land and about this home.
I also see this book as being very cinematic, talking about me watching, streaming and whatever. I see it definitely, it could be a complete series because you're getting into who the family is, the characters, heirloom, things that people really don't know anything about. And I feel
Yes.
like, has there been any movie like, or we can't talk about that yet?
We can't talk about that yet, but I do have a film agent.
Sure.
And so, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I tell you, it's just such, we've been watching a lot about World War II. There've been a lot of great shows about World War II recently. Even
Mhm.
like there was one called The New Look, which is about the styles and everything that was happening with fashion
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
fashion field. But there's not anything about the subject and that I've seen or whatever. But you've got the characters, you've got the storyline, and you've got it's all there. The characters are completely developed and you could see them working. So
Yes.
my
Yeah.
little fingers are crossed. How's that?
Yes. Thank you.
So is it Deontay Black is narrating? Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes.
Deontay Black
Yes. Oh my
narrates the
goodness.
audio, and she's done a couple. Like she's done more for you, or no, she didn't.
Deontay's a man.
Oh,
Deontay
Deontay's a man.
Black
I'm
is a man.
sorry, I missed that.
And I listen to my books on audio when they come out. And so this is what I'm listening to as we speak. And
Uh-huh.
I just love the way he narrated this book. He did a phenomenal job. I just loved it. And he did a wonderful thing for me because, as I mentioned to you, I'm a little nervous. I was a little nervous about this book because it was so different from my first book, One Summer in Savannah. And when he finished narrating it, he found me on Twitter and said, "Thank you so much. I loved this book." And
Wow.
so it was like, okay, that's validation from someone that doesn't love me, that does not know me, this a complete stranger who read this book. I love this book. He did a phenomenal job because there's a lot of characters in this book, as you know.
Yes.
Just in the men alone, there's these scenes where all four of the siblings are together, and then Ellis is there too. So there's five of them. So three male voices, two female voices. He did a phenomenal job. I could not be happier.
Oh, that's the moment where you feel like, oh, it's all good. It's all good because
Yes.
people are listening on audio these days too. So you want to
Yes.
have that moment be perfect.
Wow, as a former librarian, my goodness, our at my old library, the readership was 60-40. We had more people that were listening to audiobooks than the returning pages reading. And
Wow.
that's one thing that I'm so happy to see, the rise of audiobooks, because people read and it's taking information different formats now.
Yes.
It's just not just turning pages reading, it's also audio. A lot of people cannot hold a book in their hand. A lot of people cannot see, they need that audio. And so it's extremely important, audiobooks. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's grown like that. It's grown.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
been a very, very long time of
Yes.
the trajectory just to go like this. And people say sometimes that their audio is outselling their print. And I think the younger generation also who had listened a lot on they're listening to Spotify, they're listening to whatever. So used to listening all day long.
That's
And
right.
it's another way
That's
of
right.
listening.
Yeah,
And
because you can be in your garden and listen to a book. You can
mhm,
be cleaning your house, listen to a book. To sit down to read a book, you're doing nothing else but reading. But you can
exactly.
be reading while you're cleaning, and that's
Right.
the great thing. Yeah.
Yes. I have swim headphones that you can put music on, but mine are older.
Mhm.
And there's new ones that will actually pick up from your phone of what's going on. So you could put an audiobook on it. And I was like, that would be great. I'm gonna
That'd
swim
be
3 chapters. I'm gonna
great.
swim 5 chapters today.
Yes, that's so cool.
And people say like it gets you to do more. Like you're in the
Yeah,
garden, you don't feel like leaving. And then people start talking to you and you're like, no, don't talk to me. I'm like, or
that's right.
my favorite also is you're listening on your phone and somebody calls you and you have like a whole phone conversation and you finish and then somebody starts talking to you again and because the
That's
audio
right.
is there and I'm like, who's that? Where are
That's
they?
right.
I never am like not surprised that they're still talking to me. It's
Yeah.
very funny, very, very funny. So have you been on tour for like I guess the last week or so? Have you heard
Last week.
anything really interesting when you've been on tour so far? Has anybody said anything that
Oh my goodness.
the stories?
Yes. Yes, these stories and their stories and the inspiration stories, the reason why I wrote this book, so this stuff will not happen to other people. I met a woman who had 200 acres of air property, and she lived in Florida, and the air property was in Virginia. And she was like, I guess I need to look into that. And I thought, oh my God, please look into it. She said, I'm so nervous. I'm so scared now. You scared me. And I said, I don't mean to scare you, but I mean to bring it to your awareness that this is 200 acres in Virginia that you probably need to do something about. There
Right.
was a woman who said her father, has dementia, and they were moving him into a home, and they were cleaning out his house and checking his mail, and they went through the mail and they found a delinquent tax bill for 20 acres of land that they didn't even know that he had. And they ran down to the courthouse to hurry up and pay it because they didn't want to lose these 20 acres for a couple of $100 in property taxes. But they can't talk to him about it. They can't ask him about this land anymore. That history is gone. I've talked to so many different people that have stories where their family has lost land through eminent domain. Eminent domain is another way that land is being taken away from people. And so I have heard these interesting stories, but it makes me hopeful that now they'll tell their story. And when people read this story, that they now have heard of air land or air property, and they take the steps to protect their land the way my mother-in-law did, to save their land, to make sure it's okay. And so I end my talks by telling people, if you have air land or air property, you think that you do, ask these elders why they're still here. These questions, do we have any family land anywhere that you know of? How many acres? Where is it? Another important question to ask, do we have any estranged family members? Because if it's air property, you may not get notification that this land is for sale, because they have a legal right to sell this land because they are a legal heir. And another story that I heard that this one just made me so sad. The woman was talking to me. She said she knew her father had a sister, but they were estranged most of their life. And they found out a couple of years after that she died that she had a house with a couple of acres on it that was sold at a tax sale for a couple of $100 because
Wow.
she had no heirs, and they could not find any of her family, or didn't try. Tax sales, they don't have to try to track you down. And they lost that because she was estranged from her brother. And they were so sad to them that she had a house and this land that was just completely lost. So do we have any estranged family members that we need to make sure that are okay? And then taxes is another really big thing. I mentioned earlier that these corporations are coming in and they're buying up the land that is for sale, that people do want to sell, but they're overdeveloping it, which is raising the taxes in that area. But so many places, so many people can't afford their taxes, and land is being lost due to unpaid tax bills as well. And so I'm like, do everything you can to try to protect your land. So yes, I have heard the most amazing stories, good stories, kind of like the one that happened with my husband's family, but also, these unfortunate stories that are happening to people.
And you think about how much land is 20 acres. 20 acres is
Yes.
a lot of property.
It's
That's
a
a lot.
lot. It's a lot. And they did not know. And they were just kind of going through his mail because they were paying like any bills that he had because he had dementia. And so bills went unpaid. So they're making sure everything was paid. And they knew he had a bunch of rental homes. So they knew about the rental homes that he had, but they did not know that he had 20 acres of land just sitting there.
And it's also a lot of times older people didn't tell you what was going on. They were very quiet about what was happening. They didn't tell the children. And it was like, this is like a security blanket for us, but we don't need to tell you you have the security blanket here.
Right.
And
That's
as
right.
a result, it's nobody knows what's going on. I just find I found the topic in the book to be so interesting because it was something I clearly knew nothing about. And I look forward to more people reading and hearing about it, especially
Yes.
when you see like how many acres, like how many millions of acres are out there?
That's
20
right.
million?
That's
Yeah.
that's right. That's
Wow.
right.
So do you know what's next? You're writing clearly. You're writing clearly. Like after this, you're going to start writing on the hotel pad or something like that.
Yes, I'm working on my third book, and I'm going to say the tentative title because, again, none of my original titles actually make it. It's tentatively titled The Flower Farmer,
Mhm.
and it tells a story of a woman who, let's just say, she gets out of prison. I'm not going to, because it's a big spoiler what happens to her, but she gets out of prison, so she's on the run,
Mhm.
and she has a lot of childhood trauma. and the trauma of why she was in prison in the first place. And so she seeks and she hides out and finds herself and deals with this trauma on a flower farm in rural Alabama.
Hmm.
And so it's and then of course there's a hunky flower farmer named Jackson that's going to help her with these things. But it really I'm using Their Eyes Were Watching God and The Prince of Tides as like my inspiration books. I do that as a librarian, as an English major. I love the classics. I love the classics. And so those are my two classic type books that I'm using for the inspiration for this story. So that's what I'm working on now.
And I love that while they're classic, we knew of those people. Like we knew those people, which is very, very different. I have a problem right now because I feel like a lot of students are studying the same things that you and I read in high school and you and
Yeah,
I read in college.
that's
And
right.
I think it is turning people off about reading to a
Yeah,
large degree. I mean, I always
that's
say my
right.
son read a book a day in middle school and then he got required reading and that went out the window. And the
That's
kid
right.
will game to beat the band these days, but
Yep.
reading, not going to happen.
Yeah, when my son was in high school, one of the books they wanted him to read was Lord of the Flies, which is it was a great. I read that book in high school. We have newer modern classics. Harry Potter should be, it needs to be it's a classic now. No matter however you feel about, J.K. Rowling, that book is a classic now. Why are they not reading Harry Potter? At least the third one, The Prisoner of Azkaban, to me is the best written one, the most development one. Why are we not reading at least that one? Books that these kids actually want to read. It turns them off of reading, like you said, because they're reading this because the classics, as you said, they're great storytelling, they're great writing, but they don't move the plot forward. It's not as modern, it's not what they're used to. So we need to start incorporating more, these newer modern classics into this curriculum.
Yeah, of what people are actually interested in reading. We always used to go on vacation at the end of the summer, and it used to be the week before they went back, and that would be summer reading. And Corey would be away, my younger one, with his best friend, and they would have all the books to still read. I mean, they would just be sitting there, and they were good readers. They were both very good readers. They would read all summer, but not read these books.
Not read those. Yeah.
Never have to read, right?
Yeah.
So the two of them are sitting there, and I'm watching, and one was a group of essays, and the one turns to the other and says, I just want you to know, read the first 3 pages, and then for the next 30 goes on and on and on about the same thing. So you got it on the
Yeah.
first 3 pages. And they
Wow.
keep them talking about the books and why they don't want to be doing this. And it was such a burden. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could have handed you 10 books that you probably would have really enjoyed reading. But it's this, structure that we're in. And I said, they're reading the same Dead White Men that I read when I was in high school and college. And
That's right.
my favorite classes were like the books that changed the 60s
Yeah.
or books that changed America, and you go in and you read a number of different points of view about what was happening during a time. And it's also like in history. Remember when one son was in like 8th grade and they said to him, we can't use the textbook because if we do, we only get up to World War II, and you need to get up to more
Wow.
modern history. But you think about where a lot of our storytelling is rich around World War II. Where is it around, like, there's a lot of
Right.
there's holes in a lot of what's going on from there.
That's right. And the middle school boys that's the age where you need to be trapping these boys into reading. And that is that as a former librarian, that was the age group that struggled the most to get them into the library to want to read. And so you're feeding them this older classics that we were reading. They're not interested in that. So they're not doing anything to help encourage them to read. It's actually pushing them the opposite direction. And that's why I'm very much an advocate for let's update these books and make sure that they are reading things that they're interested in.
I remember also they read really fast, which is why the library is very important. We took my son to Borders, this is how long ago it was, and he wanted one of the Magic Tree House books, and literally it's like 20 minutes away. We got in the driveway, he goes, done. I'm just like,
Wow.
but I said, well, there goes like a $4.95 or whatever it was. But I said, okay, we're going to the library for the rest of them. But
That's
there
right.
was an age where they wanted to line up their collection of what it was. And those books are still all packed upstairs. They're not given away because they treasured that was the books that they were reading.
Right. That's
And
right.
I don't know. I just think that, and then, we talk about romantasy and everything working right now. Well, that's a real progression from Harry Potter to Twilight to the Hunger Games.
Yeah,
To,
that's right.
it's a real progression of what's going on. But there has been no big YA series after Hunger Games. There's
After
no
Hunger Games.
other thing.
Yeah,
Everybody moved into this. And a lot of what's coming out in romantasy or whatever is it's YA with a little bit more, and you can charge $10 or $12 more for it. And
that's
that's
right.
really where we are. And they're
That's where we
buying
are.
it, which normally would have been, as you as collection development are probably saying, you know, the same thing. It would have been
Mhm.
someplace else before. And
Yeah,
and then I have someone who's interning with me who's fabulous, and I keep handing her books to read. And I say, here, try this one. Tell me what you think. Try it. She's a big reader. And it's great to hear feedback about what people are like it being introduced to. Look, I got out of school. I read Danielle Steele and I read like we were all joking one day. We all did the same thing. And
that's
then we're
right.
like, oh, there are other writers, you
That's
know?
right. That's right. I like when the teachers give the kids the option to read whatever they want.
Mhm.
You know, let them choose. And the one thing that a lot in my library, a lot of the boys, what they did, they love the biographies. They want to read about LeBron James. They want to read about Kobe Bryant. They want to read the biographies about their life. You know, it's hard to get people to care about people that don't look like them or don't have the same experiences as them.
Mhm.
So I like whenever they gave them the option of just letting them pick whatever they want and write a book report on it or talk about it or discuss it in some way.
Yeah, it's like Jerry Craft's New Kid. The book was so good. Jerry Craft, because
Hmm.
what was he writing about? He's writing about this is what his experience was like. This is something that
That's
he went
right.
through. And
That's
you see
right.
like different eyes when you sit there and read that book. And then when it
Right.
wins the Newbery and it wins like the Coretta Scott King, you're sitting and going, people got that this was a really good book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has been so much fun. I hope you come up to the New York area sometime so I can meet you in person.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you so much for this. This is great. And
Uh,
thank you for reading the book. It really sounds like you really understood like what I was trying to do. So that's always such a flattering thing.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, it's a book reporter bets on selection. So I am
Oh,
going to be learning
wow.
about it. And it's like, what I try to do throughout the year is pick books that I think people are really going to love and that they're going to learn something from. But also, it's a book you can have a great book group discussion, and there's questions in the back of the book. But you could do so much with this book because it's something that you really don't know anything about. It's
That's
like
right.
I think there are going to be a handful of people in the Northeast that might know about this topic and maybe better known in the South, but it's not going to be known all around the country.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and that's the reason I like to bring a book forward like that, where the story is just so interesting. And at the beginning, you got to get past these like crazy people up front. And then it's like,
Yeah,
this is who they are and this is where they're
this is who
going.
they are. That's
This is where
right. Well,
they're
thank
going.
you so much.
So
Thank you.
it's been an absolute pleasure. So glad we had the time to do this in between all your tour stops.
Yes, ma'am.
And to everybody else, we'll see you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.